Hey everyone, it's Book of Katherine. I hope you're doing well. So, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Jordan Peterson and the Oscars. So, there's this whole tizzy this morning about him doing the Oscars and whether or not he was doing them, and it turned out it was just a hoax. I don't know why he didn't tweet it with an actual comment saying this is a hoax. I don't know if he just expected us to read it and see that, oh, they obviously made up what he said and then said, oh, hell, I'll do it. I'm just like, to say that there's fake news, we should know that it's all fake news. I'm like, at least say just like the things that I don't know. But anyway, after Ricky Gervais and the absolute popularity of it, it is something that Hollywood definitely do. I sure they might be fishing to see if people are interested. Of course, they're interested in Jordan Peterson doing it. Of course, they want to see if people are interested in doing it. The question is, should he do it and would he do it? There is no such thing, in my opinion, in the United States of America where we have the Bill of Rights. There is no such thing as should. I don't think there are any shoulds. This whole idea of should somebody do something is only something that the monarchy ever says and the royal court says when they start saying, should somebody be allowed to do it? That's literally how the monarchy thinks. That's literally how the monarchy thinks and speaks, is when they start judging somebody and saying, thou shalt not be allowed and thou should be. And they say that because they believe their voice of God. That's also something the Pope thinks they can do, is say, thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do this. You are in my court and you shall be kicked out if thou shalt do this, and blah, 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 blah. In America, we have these few simple rules, don't steal and don't murder, and these are the rules of law. Very simple ones. When you get into issues of morality and culture and speech, we had very, very large ranges of freedom. And things like, should you do a gig? Nowhere near. Like, that isn't even close. But because climate change agenda includes culture, it's literally a socialist concept, which is something the Queen Victoria and Albert came up with in 1840s, sorry. Together when, Britain and Germany came together again in that union again and started releasing socialism over the wire. It's just, they started regulating the culture again. It's just the monarchy, of saying like this is how we'll do things through the church, using the church and religion, and religion does the same thing. It says this is the way you should think, this is the way you should act, this is the way you should dress. It's no different. And so they use the headlines to do it. They use social media to do it, and they say this is what we should be doing. Do you think? And they use influencers to do it all the time. You would be amazed. They get the Rubin Report to get on there, and he just so casually goes, so what do you think? Should we be allowed? And I'm just like, I can't believe you're asking. If you're really a free speech person, you would never start with that question. The very fact that you're asking that question, the very fact that if they're really a libertarian, as you say, you never start a question with, well, should we be allowed? Should you be saying this? Should they be doing that? The moment you start with that question, you're not a freedom person. You're not a liberty person. No one, only monarchs and socialists that work for those monarchs think that way. Only emperors of Rome think that way. Only imperialists think that way. When you start hurting people and start saying, oh, they should dress this way, they shouldn't dress that way. Is it best for society if we don't murder each other? Yeah, but, should you use that word? Are you joking? So, as for Peterson, the only thing I can ask myself is like, would I do it? Like, if he asked my advice and said, would it be good for my career? How would it affect society? Do I want to do it? I know I'd be conflicted. I know that I would be conflicted. I can see why there would be a debate. I can see why they'd put a fishing rod out there and see how people would handle it. And that's simply because, and I realize the reason why it's conflicting is simply because the Oscars, it may have been one thing at one point, but Hollywood has become so poisoned. And not necessarily the people that make it up, but literally the loudspeaker of Hollywood, the things that they have awarded, which is specifically the Oscars. And so that's what I'd like to address today. Is exactly what the Oscars are. So I basically say like what I would do. For example, if he called me up and said, I'm conflicted, I don't know what to do. The Oscars called me. Is this gig a good deal? Is it good for humanity? Will get my message across? my instinct would say they're going to make fun of you. And all I'd ever be able to say is like, would I do it? Would I do it? And I would be conflicted two ways. Number one, no, I don't think I could do it. Mostly because for the last 30 years, it's been pretty much a Nazi platform for 30 years. It would be like joining the Roman Colosseum, and standing up there with Caesar almost, and joining the persecution of all of the people who rebelled against Caesar, that they now say like doesn't happen, even though they have mosaics of it happening, which just, I should have known something was changing back then. And who was going to be heading it up back then and what kind of things were about to come, right? So, but basically, let me put into perspective what the Oscars have done and what they've awarded. So let's put it into perspective. If they called me up, I would have to say, well, what type of organization are you, Oscars? What do you reward? Okay. In the past 30 years, you have given awards to those who have committed the most atrocious human rights offenses in the world. You have lifted up and praised those who have repainted the history of slaving. And you have trampled, and you've awarded also those who have trampled the history of those who have given the most freedom to human rights. So by that I'll say, and I'll actually give you an example of this. It would be hard because I'd be like, you've literally reversed slavery so much so that, let me give you an example. One of the worst slave traders in the world history, one of the worst war criminals of all times, one of the worst human rights abusers of all times, one of the people with the most blood on their hands in all of world history is Queen Victoria. Worst blood on their hand, worst imperialists of all time, right? Led to the Congo, India, South America, Canada, colonialism just across the globe, Australia, mining across the entire globe. Insistence on being called insistence on being called emperor, empress, insistence on being ruler, insistence on free trade, which means slavery, humans being traded as cattle. I'll show you, like, for example, in India, that's the first time India was already being traded by the English by Queen Elizabeth. They were East India Trading Company, was already by Elizabeth. But under Queen Victoria, that's when we started seeing the East India Trading Company start to look like this. That is exactly what we had with, we know this kind of figure. That's what we had in the death camps at Auschwitz. How do you think the Germans learned they could push them this far? How do you think they knew exactly what limits? I told you, everyone was so shocked in Germany, but I was like, this was learned, the monarchy knew, and they built these camps very, very quickly, and they knew how to dispose of it very, very quickly. These were atrocities that they had been carrying on very quickly, and what they were shocked by is that they brought them to Europe. And Queen Victoria and her family had been doing it across the world. And instead, Hollywood rewarded with Golden Globes, Academy Awards. Dame Judi Dench should have told you right there that the monarchy put her into the royal court. She played Queen Elizabeth. She played Queen Victoria 3 times. Let's see all the different ways. When you think of Queen Victoria, when she was committing those atrocities that you just saw, this is exactly how they portrayed her instead, as Mrs. Brown, as this motherly old person that was having a love affair. When she was portrayed like this, exactly like that, Exactly at that time is when she had Parliament pass the act that said she had to be addressed in person as Empress of India. Exactly the same time that she's given that look. She was pissed that anyone was entering her court from India and not addressing her as such, and so she had Parliament, because Parliament is not a republic. They're not a republic. She was so angry, she had Disraeli pass a law that said anyone in her presence must address her as Majesty, Emperor, Empress, the whole 9 yards. And they must bow and curtsy in her presence. Does that look like that? Oh, no. She also portrayed her as, right? Remember this lovely portrayal that Dame Judi Dench gave of India? Isn't that a nice portrayal of India? Oh, when she traveled over to India, look at that nice smile that she has, because she had such a nice relationship with her servant, right? Wasn't it so charming that she had a servant when she was Empress of India? You know what they didn't show you? They didn't show you all of the statues that she commanded. Did you see all the statues that she had made that still stand in India because it's still a commonwealth? India isn't free. It's still a communist. It's still a dominion. It's a socialist country underneath their dominion. Do you see that? Up here, she has small women on their hands and knees scrubbing. Small little itty bitty woman. She never let the suffrage act get through. She suppressed women's rights. Meanwhile, in America, suffragettes, 1869, Wyoming gave women the first right to vote. No, actually, the first right to vote was in 1700s in like West Virginia or something, and then they themselves took out their right to vote. And then they gave themselves in Wyoming the right to vote. And it was like 20 states have the right to vote. But guess what Google tells you? Google will tell you, no, Britain gave the right to vote to women in 1918. They'll say Britain did it first. No, 20 states gave the right to women to vote all through the 1800s. All through the 1800s, women were voting. In America, meanwhile, Queen Victoria was ruling, shutting down every single uprising for women's rights to votes. She was like, nope. Meanwhile, at the same time, she's going out throughout and doing all these statues in India. That's her right to rule. I have the right to rule. I am God's word on earth. Right to rule. Throne. That's her palace she built herself back there. Oh, by the way, speaking of all that, I should say, here's another lovely one that she had built for herself. I should go ahead and show you what King George III built, because remember, Elizabeth I was the one that did East India Trading Company, right? Another woman. Women's history is so amazing, and Hollywood doesn't tell you that, right? Look at this place. Do you know where this is? This is in Brighton, England. King George III built it when he got pissed that he lost out on America. Do you know why he built it? He built it because they already owned so much of India that he just rebuilt the Taj Mahal times 4. Look at the size of this place. It's massive. Massive. So they would come down to Brighton. All right, go ahead and just look up. Look up Brighton Palace, the Royal Palace in Brighton. It is nothing to sneeze at. This is what King George III built in the 1700s, right after he lost America. When we were building the White House, this is what he was building because they had already conquered all of India. That is how much, and they do tons of fundraisers there. They light it up with all these rainbow colors. But they do Young Victoria with Emily Blunt. They do a great job of making the royals look amazing. But the royals are the ones who have been the imperialists and done the Congo. They're the ones that are in charge of the Nazis, that have done Auschwitz. The most skeletal, horrific things. They haven't told the story, but then it's amazing. All these amazing human rights things have happened in America. We have done the railroads. We have done flight. We have gotten the gift of flight. We have done all these incredible, incredible things, including given the very first slave right. Like, they didn't even tell the story about how we went to the West Coast to beat out Queen Victoria because she wanted to make sure slave rights, the right to have free trade over fair trade, which was, without slavery, the abolitionists had to move their butts. The abolitionists had to get to the West Coast and beat out Queen Victoria, who wanted slave trading to hit the West Coast. Hollywood didn't make that story. Instead, they made the monarchy look great. So my point is that I don't know if I could ever say, yes, I used to love going to the Oscars. There are some hardworking people there. But who they choose to reward constantly have made the young people constantly of the world think that monarchs, the ones who have the most blood on their hands, the monarchs are amazing, while the Americans who fought and bled and died and gave up their families for the freedom in this world, things like True Blood made them think that they're just hicks. I mean, the way they always treat the South with such disdain. And I don't get it. I don't get it. They always send the Southern boys over to fight. And at the same time, have you noticed? I noticed something. There are no sanctuary states in the South. The South are the British colonies. And I noticed where they funded the British Navy, the Royal Navy. It's not the British Navy, it's the Royal Navy. All the areas in Britain, where they all had Islam come up, all the actual advertising for the Royal Navy targets all the young men that have been open to abuse and violence. They're like, look, there's a safe place for you to go, from all this stuff we've exposed you to from open immigration. Run to the Royal Navy. Help us protect our global empire, this huge commonwealth and dominion we have across the globe. That's terrifying, you guys. I'm like, do these boys know what they're defending? So I just don't know if I could ever work for the Oscars simply because of who they reward. They reward bad behavior, as Dr. Phil says. They reward the slave traders, the perpetrators of slavery over the last since 1600. And they seem to be they even make Rome. I remember when Bloodsport came out, I remember being scared as a kid. Scared as a kid because I just learned that Rome was bad, and I remember thinking it reminded me of Rome. I just learned it. How young was I? I just learned Rome was bad and we had just gotten out of civilization. We just learned that open hand fisting and that was uncivilized, and that we as men, we hadn't done that since the Colosseum, that was brutal and uncivilized, and that had ended with the Roman Empire. And I was like, why are we making that? I knew that if it was up in film that it would come back, and it has. Now we're doing Bloodsport again, and we're actually having our men, and they say online, they're like, well, there's nothing else for these men. And I was like, there used to be. We used to say people are special. And now all we say, the headlines say, we're just animals. And they say, oh, if you have mental illness, you're just an animal. That apparently, if you have any kind of mental illness, you're no more than an animal. You have no reason. You have any sort of mental illness, all your ability to reason has gone. You're no better than an animal on the street. And so you're responsible for nothing. The entire DSM is just means you're an animal. You have no humanity. And I'm just like, do you know how far you have to go in mental illness to ever get to, I don't think they've ever been able to get a person way to animalism, that far dissociated. We are too special. We're too divine. That's what all of it's shown. We're way too divine. We have this fight or flight in us. And we just keep everything, the headlines keeps trying to excuse it away. And it really seems to me like they want us to be okay with that skeletal thing. They want us to be okay with Nazi behavior. They want us to be okay with imperialism and monarchs and rewarding it. And I just could never, ever, it's not the stars that are there. As you saw, a lot of the stars actually enjoyed the jokes of Ricky Gervais. It's who they choose. It's who the Academy itself chooses to nominate. They always pick out, if a film does anything on the monarchy, it's guaranteed to get nominated. And then it's guaranteed, like what Judi Dench in 1999, she did a 6-minute bit. She was in the movie for 6 minutes in a comedy playing Queen Elizabeth, and she won. And I was like, she played the role of the woman who started the East India Trading Company. The first time we ever had photos of people that skeletal. How disgusting can you get? That's the Oscars for you. That's the Oscars of today. So if Jordan Peterson called me up, I'd say, I'm sorry, but my values do not align with your organization. I apologize. I'll have to decline. And that doesn't go for every organization, but that just happens to go with this one. It has nothing to do with rich or poor. I mean, Donald Trump is rich, and every act he's done aligns. It has literally nothing to do with rich or poor. That has nothing to do with rich men saved World War II. Never forget that it was a rich man at the Treasury Department that saved the Jews in World War II. Never forget that. It doesn't have anything to do with rich or poor. It has to do with your values. Profit over life. If you're okay with slavery, and if you value freedom or not. All right, love you guys so much. Bye.